Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joel Rose. I'm here with two colleagues, Eddie Huang and Janae Henry, and we're really excited to be here to talk to you about the time for innovative learning models. We hope by the end of this session, you understand a little bit about what innovative learning models are and how we think they're going to shape the future of education. But first, to start off, we want to go back and do a little bit of history. I love history. I'm a big history buff. I know Eddie and Janae are as well. And we want to go back a little bit to the 1870s. This was a time when both Jonathan Swan and Thomas Edison independently had invented the reusable light bulbs. And Edison said by the 1880s, he was going to create a factory that would enable electricity to serve as a commodity. And it would be powering many of the factories that existed at that time. They were all powered by steam. Everyone was super excited about this. But by the 1900s, only about 5% of factories across the country were actually using electricity. And many of the entrepreneurs who decided to invest in electricity really had second thoughts. They weren't so sure it was worth it, which is what made lots of other entrepreneurs decide not to go down that path. Now, why was that? Well, a big reason was when we had factories that were driven off of steam, the steam engines worked off of a central shaft that existed either just inside or just outside of the factory floor. And the entire factory was organized in order to access energy from that particular steam engine. When that steam engine was replaced with electricity, the factories didn't realize very much benefit from doing that, which is why so few entrepreneurs decided to make the change. But then what happened was some very clever entrepreneurs realized that by using electricity, they didn't need to organize their entire factory around the drive shaft. They could use small electric motors, and that would enable electricity to go anywhere in the factory. They basically reimagined the factory floor in ways that were mindful of what electricity could then enable. And this is what spurred the entire industrial revolution. It allowed factories to be organized around specialization. And specialization was what was so key to the American success in the Industrial Revolution. By 1920, about half of all factories were operating with electricity. And by the end of the 1920s, 78% had taken that switch. So why did it take so long for that one key lesson to be learned, and then ultimately that changed American manufacturing? Hold that question. We're going to talk about another lesson from history. 1951, the first commercially available computer comes onto the market. 1989, the World Wide Web. These two things were going to revolutionize productivity. But if we look at our nation's productivity since then, we really didn't see a massive change either at the time the computers came onto the market or the time we saw the World Wide Web. Why is that? Well, there was a set of researchers at MIT that dug into this very question. And what they found, what they called the productivity paradox. Some companies made incredible gains in productivity during this time, and others stayed flat. And the difference between the two was one group really changed the way it did its business. It didn't just layer technology on top of the same way of doing work. It reimagined the way work was happening overall, much in the same way that the factories did as well. A third example would be in the 1930s. In the 1930s were a time where we saw the invention of both and the availability of both the refrigerator and the washing machine. But as useful as those two appliances are, if we look at their growth, they have not followed the same path. Refrigerators got very, very popular very, very quickly. By 1950, they were over 80% in over 80% of homes. But washing machines took a lot longer. Why would that be? Well, the answer to that question has to do with actually the homes that they're in. Refrigerators could be plugged right into the wall and made use of right away without disrupting how a house would be constructed or organized. But washing machines required new plumbing. It required a different way of thinking about a laundry room or a garage that had the plumbing built in, and that's what it took so long for washing machines to get as popular as refrigerators. We say all this to say that when we think about education and technology, one of the most important questions, which came out in 2017 in an article on EdSurge, is your EdTech product a refrigerator or is it a washing machine? Is it basically a tool to do the way you've always done school? Or is it helping to reimagine the way school happens in ways that are much more effective for both teachers and for students? And that's what we're talking about today with innovative learning models. Over the last 30 years, you see that US educational technology spend has gone up quite a bit. But the results, at least as based on NAEP, show that for 17-year-olds, math has been fairly flat, and so has reading. And so the question is, what can we learn from the experiences of electricity, from the experiences of the computers, and from the experiences of washing machines to help us understand how we can truly unlock the potential of technology to transform education? It's going to require thinking more like the washing machine and less like the refrigerator. We also know that by not thinking differently, by just having these powerful tools cascaded onto the same delivery model, that's led to unacceptable gaps in achievement across various racial and ethnic groups. COVID-19 provides a unique moment to begin to think differently, to really reimagine the learning model itself, the way we do school in ways that are mindful, both of what teachers can do and of what technology can do. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Janae Henry, to talk a little bit about this moment and how we can really use it to catalyze a whole new wave of innovation in education. Janae?
Thank you so much, Joel. I really could sit in Professor Rowe's economic history class day in and day out. I found that invigorating and fun. Hi, everybody. I'm Janae Henry Wood, and I head learning at Transcend, which is an organization that thinks a lot about how to spread innovative learning models. So right now, I'm going to take us into a slightly wonky, but hopefully interesting characterization of how we are thinking about what these innovative models are before passing it to my colleague, Eddie, who's going to help us actually see one. So as Joel said, the COVID-19 pandemic offered us a really powerful, probably once in a generation moment to really assess and look at what our learning model is uniquely positioned to do, and sadly, where it is not meeting the needs of young people. For most of young people in the past year and a half, remote learning and hybrid learning just didn't work so well. We're seeing that in rising mental health challenges for both students and adults. We're seeing that in conversations around certainly academic learning loss, but also the socio-emotional components of schooling as well. Additionally, we're seeing in communities of color and students from low income backgrounds who were hit hardest by the dueling crises of the moment. And so truly, in the last 18 months, we were able to see some of these sort of inborn deficiencies of this model, but there are also some real possibilities that are coming to the fore as well. So this shift from remote learning exposed some of the flaws in this outdated schooling model. It exposed some of the holes in the pipe. Many school communities begin to wonder, what might it look like for us to redesign some of that piping and to embark on a design journey that helps us think really differently about what this schooling model looks like? This is one of the several positive forces, I think, at work in the moment as students and educators are seeing real advantages from this time of being able to sit and pause and reflect and not go back to business as usual. So in our work, we really see both the need to recover from the last 12 to 18 months, but we also see it as a profound moment to really reinvent and to think very differently about the core model and about all of the different innovations and the pipes that it takes to do that. So at Transcend, let me just introduce you to a quick framework here. You might be wondering, what sort of characterizes an innovative learning model? What is it, in fact? So when we think about this, we really center our definition around student experiences. So that is the total lived experience of a young person in a schooling environment. What are children being asked to do? How are they being asked to do it? And what are they ultimately producing? So we think that if you really want to reimagine the learning model and reimagine schooling, you have to get to these sort of core student experiences. We think about these student experiences on 10 dimensions. On the right side, you will see what we've described as the factory model classroom. So if you go back and think about some of the slides that Joel shared with us, you saw folks sitting at their desks individually, head first, looking down, doing some rote tasks. In many ways, that is exactly also the model that we then replicated in our schools. If you were to look at the school, look at that factory picture next to each other, you'd find so many things similar about that, probably more things similar than dissimilar. So on the left side, we have characterized and broken it down to sort of 10 sort of core experiences. You'll see that often children are doing very rote activities. Let's do a do now, let's copy, let's move forward. You might see that children are isolated in their learning. They're sitting in their desks working individually on their sheet of paper. You might see real passive compliance, a teacher at the front of a classroom saying, we're now doing this, we're now doing that, with children nodding, moving forward, agreeing, and basically going through the motions of the day. That in general, are some of the kinds of student experiences that we see across. This is not to say that every single classroom in America, in the world, is only doing this. There are so many learning environments that are making iterative jumps on these experiences, but this is the general sort of characteristic flow. If you were to go from school to school, you would likely see many of these characteristics on the left. But if you think about the right, and these are experiences that we would describe as ones that are promoting equity and ones that are so much more in line with what we've learned in the 21st century around the learning science and the brain science for how young people grow and learn. There's a different set of experiences that we want to prioritize. Going from a real emphasis on only rote cognitive learning, so you're in social studies, that's what you're learning, to really thinking about a whole child focus. How do we help, grow and develop students' cognitive abilities, but also their emotional, their social, their mental, their mental abilities as well. That's one example of a shift that we would want to make to the right. The next is we'd want to go from, maybe very inflexible systems. You're in one classroom focused on one thing, reading one text, everybody's doing the same thing, to much more customized kinds of environments where you're taking into account a child's lived experience, their schematics and background, what they already know coming in. So those are some examples of what we see as being an opportunity as we think about innovative learning models. They are models that are really trying to make a leap from the left side of this column to the right side of this column along many important dimensions that matter. So now, let's think about the sort of components of the model itself. So what's important to note is that those 10 key student experiences that I just described are not the model itself. They're rather the experiences that need to live in the model. So there are sort of 4 domains that we think about when we think about the components of an innovative model. It includes the academic design, what's actually happening academically for students, what they're learning, the teacher practices, so that is the pedagogy, the relationships, what teachers are doing, saying, acting, thinking, the technology and data, particularly interesting to this crowd. How are we thinking about that? How are we utilizing that? Not just adding that on, but actually thinking about redesigning the core of the classroom to help that come to life. And then the operational design. What does it actually take to make this thing come to life? What are all the different knobs in a schooling environment we would have to turn to make this come to life? Innovative learning models are learning models that are making shifts from the left side to the right side, and they are doing that along these sort of 4 dimensions. So you could imagine a school saying, we really want to focus on our core academic design, and we want to move from an inflexible system where all children are sitting in a room focused on the same thing to a much more customized system, for example. And so that's how we would really define what these models are and the kinds of experiences we hope that they evoke. Now, If I were putting on my old hat as a former middle school teacher and I were sitting in this session, I might be saying to myself, great, now this is more and more and more and more things that you want me to do. But what support, what help here? And I think one of the things I've come to see and learn, especially as I've been in lots of different school communities across the country that are doing this work, is that innovative learning models are really about helping a teacher, practitioners in particular, do something different, not necessarily more. So, unlike so many innovations that I know many of us have either experienced or been a part of or been a part of development, some of the teacher aspects, the actual teacher facilitative components, are not always designed into the model itself. It's often something extra that we're loading on at the end. What I think is profound and important about innovative learning models is that teacher practice domain. That domain is designed for and thought of from the outset, as opposed to something that we just sort of do at the very end and expect teachers to take it up. So, next two important questions here. One is, what is it going to take for these kinds of models to spread? And there's sort of three things that we think here. The first is we think it's going to take supply. We actually need many, many, many more models out there. I use kind of a bad example here, so just roll with it on this Sunday afternoon. But I always tell people, imagine if you went into a shoe store and there was just one shoe. It was a pretty decent shoe. It was a Converse, like maybe you liked it, maybe you looked kind of cool in it, but there's like one shoe and that's it. That's kind of what we've got going on with school, you all. We might have a couple of different variations on a theme. Maybe somebody's added a red stripe to the Converse, or they've added a rubber sole, or they've added a star to it, or they've added some different laces. But for the most part, we've got that like one shoe. And if you think about the factory model that we have now, that's kind of the only kick in town. It's the only game in town. And what we really have to get in the business of doing is to say to ourselves, how do we get many more models that can show a different way of learning into our system? Many more models to challenge that one brand. That one brand might get us somewhere, right? Like we have shoes. We are able to do lots of things, but it's just one. And it might not be meeting all of the diverse needs that other models, other shoes might do. I'm going to let this metaphor drop because I think it's like breaking apart, but I think you sort of get what I mean. We need to increase the supply. And we have to do that by helping to spark demand in communities. So demand for these new models. And then we have to really codify these models in ways that are shareable to other people. So we have to find ways of packaging them, of creating learning experiences around them that allow communities to take them up. Here's the next thing that we need. We also need demand. So just as we have people who have built supply, they've built a new model, they've built a new shoe, it's not much if we don't have a community to take it up. And so we have to really think about communities that don't want to start their innovation from scratch. Maybe they know they want to go forth and they want to change something in their school, but they don't really know where to begin. We need to have a supply of those codified models that have the kind of training experiences and have the kind of documents that are codified for people to actually use and apply. Communities need those. And so part of this work in getting innovative learning models to spread is to help cultivate the right conditions for communities that might be taking up those models. And we think about those conditions along 5 dimensions. The conviction that a community has that it needs to go on a design journey and it needs to change the way it's doing schooling. The clarity around that vision, how clear can they get in describing the outcomes, the kinds of experiences they want. We think the third element of building coalition is super important. I can't really see everyone, but if I were to ask y'all in a room to raise your hands about an awesome innovation that you'd seen that only one person in the district wanted, and everybody else was like, I don't know what he's talking about, but I guess this is the innovation of the day. We think that coalition, having true buy-in from parents, from other key stakeholders, is incredibly important. The next is to have a culture of innovation. So that is the habits and the mindsets around change. And then, of course, all importantly, the capacity to do it. We know that it takes a lot of time, energy, and toil to do these things correctly, to learn from them, to build in those learning cycles. And so that is super important, a community's capacity to do so. If we think about how to stoke these 5 conditions, we can truly help communities that want to go on this journey, that want to adopt more models, to do so. But then there's always the question of the context that both supply and demand exist in. And so this is why policies that are conducive to this kind of innovation are so important. For example, thinking about how to modernize procurement for districts, how we set up the relationship between supply and demand feels deeply important. Thinking differently about assessment and accountability. Oftentimes we know that when you're innovating, you might be held account to the exact same standards that you were a year ago, even as you're trying to really innovate and do something different. And then the third is stoking many more kinds of spaces where innovation can happen, like an innovation zone. That is obviously not an exhaustive list, but an idea of the kinds of policies, environments that can enable more of those experiences to happen. Okay, so that was a lot of me talking. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Eddie. And Eddie's going to actually get into showing us a little bit about what these innovative learning models actually look and feel like in practice. So Eddie, are you there? May I hand it to you?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Handing it
Awesome.
to you.
Thank you, Janae. So I'm Eddie Huang. I'm Director of Partnerships for New Classrooms, but I spent a dozen years using and designing different blended learning products. And then it shifted to personalized learning, right? We started calling it blended learning at first, called it personalized learning. And now I come work for New Classrooms and the idea of innovative learning models, because there was a little frustration on my end as I saw how blended learning products really just fed into the factory model. All the kids on screens doing the same thing at the same time, even if they said that it was personalized, we didn't see it move the needle, right? And so this idea of, I think, an innovative learning model is really crucial, but how to bring it to life is, I think, the real question right now. I think everybody's itching to know the answer to that. And again, this is just one model, right? So there are going to be others, and we want to encourage others. We want to really make sure that we can bring to life and sort of visualize what a model might look like. So I am not the person on the screen. You can see me on the webcam on the bottom, I think. This is Jafari, and he has a really sweet tiger shirt. He's a student in Atlanta, in Fulton County, and he is a student in Teach to One, the model that New Classrooms has designed. So when Jafari goes to class, instead of going to a regular class with 30 desks all facing the teacher and all the kids learning the same thing, Jafari walks into a dynamic space. And this space has lots of different areas for learning. It has areas where you're working with the teacher. It has areas where you're working with other students. It has areas where you are working individually, maybe on a device or maybe offline on a worksheet. And the way all the students know where to go at any point is they look up at their schedule. And so this is kind of like an airport terminal monitor. So you know how it tells your gate assignments for all the different flights? Every single student will have a unique schedule for that day. And that schedule is based on assessment and data from the day before. And so for the first session or the first modality, Jafari might be working with the teacher on area of a circle or Pythagorean theorem or something with 8 or 10 other students. And this is a teacher-led modality, but every single student in this group has accomplished and mastered all the different predecessor skills to really be able to acquire Pythagorean theorem. And so what you can do as a teacher is so much more involved, right? These 8 to 10 kids, there's no one in the back who's far behind. There's no one who's too far ahead of the class. But every single student, you can actually ask questions, you can have a little bit more discourse, you can really call on them and push them a little bit more. After that, Jafari maybe is going to a small group collaborative modality on Pythagorean theorem. And so these are 3 or 4 kids who are just in that session, but here you're taking everything you just learned and you're applying it to a word problem, to a group problem, to something applicative. And then that way you can be pushing each other, you're conversing, you're critiquing each other's reasoning. There's actual conversation happening here. And if you're thinking of depth of knowledge, this is what you're trying to go for in a classroom, right? And this gives you the opportunity to do so. At the same time, across the classroom, there's going to be all these other modalities, right? You remember the classroom that Jafari walked into, there's spaces for teacher-led, there's spaces for small group. So in a room with 60 or 80 kids, there's maybe 3 or 4 different teacher-led modalities going on at a time. There's multiple small group modalities. There's kids on the side working independently. And at the end of class, every single student will take an exit slip. This is a low stakes formative assessment that's unique to the students based on their schedule for that day. And that data is then analyzed to answer 4 questions. It answers, what concept should a student learn the next day? So did you do well and did you actually proceed and you mastered it so you can move on? Or did you actually need some review? It'll answer, what content will you use? So are you going to use a whole group problem for a small group modality? Or are you going to use a project for something that you're working on with a group of students over the course of several weeks? Is it going to be a Khan Academy lesson to practice something? And then it'll also answer what other students are going to be working with you. So if 3 students are ready for a modality and they're ready to practice something or review something or push each other a little bit further, they'll be working together. If there's 8 or 10 students who need to learn something new, the teacher will be working with them on a new concept. And so every single day, students will take their exit slips, and every single day, students will get a new schedule based on how they did the day before. So if you're thinking data-driven instruction, this is it. And so this is what we're trying to do with our quick quizzes and our homeworks and our tests every single day. But here it's done personalized and it's analyzed every single day, graded with immediate feedback, and the kids get a brand new schedule for the next day. So I know that's a lot and it's a little hard to visualize too, right? You want to hear it from the teacher perspective. So we actually have a little video that might show a little bit of this. And then Janae and I will have a little conversation about how this really takes the shift from the factory model to this idea of a 21st century model. So I'm going to play this video. And if you can't hear or if there's any issues, say so in the chat. And let's see if this works.
I'm a former teacher. I taught 5th grade and I was given a set of 5th grade math textbooks and told good luck. And I think that's the story of thousands of teachers across the country and around the world each day. We have this idea in our mind of putting one teacher, 30 or so kids in an 800 square foot room with a textbook, and then we start the conversation about how do we make our schools better. And I think for us, the question was, do we have to necessarily start with those assumptions?
Originally, Joel and I just went to lunch, and he had this idea that he wanted to be able to personalize learning in some way, shape, or form, and I just come off some large technology projects in the New York City Department of Ed, and we just started brainstorming.
Teach to One is an entirely different learning model. A learning model that has both an academic component, so things like learning progressions and skill maps and content and assessment, but also an operational component. How does homework work? Student traffic flow, where do kids put their backpacks? Where if there's a substitute teacher one day? We've integrated all of these things into a program that can then be configured to the needs of each type of school.
Having a program that exists that allows a child to feel that success and that allows a child to be pushed has just been remarkable for us as a school.
I enjoy teaching kids, watching them learn new things, aha moment, like when they finally get it. That's my passion. Teach to One is different from traditional classroom because you're not using a textbook and doing one lesson. We have different modalities, so the kids have the opportunity to learn a skill in different ways. They could have a live lesson with a teacher, they could be learning with a peer, or they could be learning with a small group.
Sometimes you learn from the teacher and you need to just sort of go off and think about that and then come back. Or sometimes you need to have another student explain it to you in another way. So we think the teacher plays a tremendously critical role in what's going on, but there are certain pieces that maybe a student can do on a computer or they can do with other students, which allows those teachers to focus more specifically on individual students.
I can tell you as a teacher, I could never create, well, I guess I can't say never, but it'd be very challenging for anyone to flawlessly create a lesson for one block of maybe a 3rd grade, an 8th grade, a 7th grade, all in one room, and then be able to take the exit slip and figure out who needs more, who needs different, who needs what, and create a whole new day for the next day.
We have to balance 3 things, both what the needs are for the individual student, what the group needs are for the entire class or cohort of students, and what the teacher's realities are as well. So you have to figure out, how do you balance these 3 things? We call it our scheduling trinity.
At times we think that we know, oh, it's only an algorithm, like the program might not pick up on this, and then it does.
So we're about 116, 117% above average in year 1 of implementation. Our ELL students and our special needs students have scored well above the national average as well. So it's been a fantastic first year.
They do a lot of the behind the scenes thinking that we don't really have to focus on, so we can focus on teaching and learning, and that's been, so it's been an incredible partnership.
I like the collaboration. I like the variety of each day. Days fly by now as a teacher. I like the different modalities, and it just makes it exciting.
So what we're seeing are teachers embracing the shift, finding that it creates a much more fulfilling professional experience for them. We're seeing students embrace this shift. It's far more engaging than flipping through the pages of a textbook over the course of the year. And we're seeing administrators embrace this shift. They're wanting to be responsive to what their communities are asking for, which is to make sure the schools are able to meet the unique needs of each and every student.
Kids who get a green in my class, I started just a little fist bump thing. And so when the kids get their green or green sparkly, it's, I got a green, fist bump. And they're coming up and they're excited about it.
There is a genius inside every student, and we have to figure out how to unlock it and get it out there. And the traditional model, while it reaches plenty of students, it doesn't reach everyone. So we owe it to them to go on this journey, to find a way to get there.
I hope that played for everybody. I'm going to go back to the slides.
Perfect. I had so many thoughts as I was watching that, Eddie, particularly amazement. But first thinking, God, so many things in my life might have been differently around math had that been the model I learned it. But I'd love for you to just, walk us through a bit as we think about this shift from factory experiences to more 21st century experiences around the sort of 4 elements of a learning model. Tell us what we saw a little bit, particularly what really stood out to me was customization. I could really see that, and I could really see some active self-direction. Are those things that you would say are core to the model? What did we see around that?
Yeah, I think in the current model, right, it's so inflexible. And I'll say something that's maybe a little controversial, and the scope and sequence and pacing that we force on all kids, where all of them learn the same thing at the same time, is just so antithetical to, I think, what a personalized, sort of unique learner-centered model will look like. And it's not that we don't have high expectations for kids. We really want that, right? And so I think what a 21st century model should have is, are you able to really have the same scope all the kids want to get from point A to point B, but the path they take to get there might be totally different. And so you still have high expectations, but you need constant formative low stakes assessments so they're not stressed and over tested, but it's a way to really analyze what they know. And then you need a model to actually bring them together in ways that are different, right? So it's not just passive learning where learners are sitting back and sort of all again learning the same thing, and then you see kids in the back of the classroom with their heads down because they don't really understand what's going on, or they've missed a couple classes already. But then if you have a dynamic classroom where kids are constantly coming together in small groups, they're doing projects, they're working with the teacher, but in a smaller group than in a traditional classroom, then you get so much more teacher time, you get much more engaged learners. All the work is in their zone of proximal development too. And so when immediately, and that's the first step, once you get that, the kids can feel a little success. They're like, I got this. I'm not stupid. I am a math person. And a little confidence goes a long way. And so once you're able to customize your things, your learning, once you're able to have a little bit more ownership, you're able to see immediate feedback and set goals for yourself every single day. There's so much to this. I think what Teach to One really allows, and any innovative learning model should allow, is the opportunity for those shifts, right? It gives you the opportunity to actually be an owner of your own learning, the opportunity to be engaged with other students and to really grapple with questions together, or to apply or demonstrate your learning to the rest of the class. And I think the inflexible systems just make it hard to do that.
That's a great point. That really resonates. And we saw so many different pairings and so many different clusterings of students, which also I think goes a long way to building the connection and community and socio-emotional skills that we know are so critical for learning.
Totally.
Let me, Eddie, put on my skeptical hat for a moment.
Okay.
If I were to put on my skeptical hat, I'd be like, Eddie, that video was awesome. Great. Like, shot really well. Perfect. I see kids moving around. Feels great. But like, are they actually learning? What are you actually seeing in Teach to One classrooms? What are you actually seeing in terms of their growth? Is this thing actually working or not? Or does it just look good and sound cool?
That's a really good question. And I'll answer it in two ways. I think the first is you want to measure it by test scores and achievement. That's crucial. And I'll have that. I think that's the next slide. I think what you, can you see that?
Perfect.
And so I think what you also want to know is when you're in a Teach to One classroom and you're speaking to the students, are they able to talk about their own learning? Are they able to really talk about, show you their notebook and show you how they've written down all of their learning, their vocabulary, they've shown their work? And that's, I think, the real key. And so you can't really see that necessarily on a test, but what I would challenge you to do is really get to know the kids on multiple measures, right? And that's the best way, I think, to analyze any innovative learning model. But then when you're talking about test scores, there's a really good one, an independent evaluation that was done of every single school using Teach to One over the course of 3 years. So longitudinal 3-year study. And the percentile growth was 20 percentile points. So they started on average at the 15th percentile, and they ended at the 35th percentile over the course of those 3 years. And that was really a remarkable achievement. And then if you split it out by schools that had a little bit more fidelity, a little bit more consistency over those 3 years, they were growing 35 or 40 percentile points, which was really astounding. And I think this really, set the stage for a lot of us to be talking about this right now.
Brilliant. Sorry, I'm jumping. Sorry, brilliant, Eddie. I love it. I was gonna then pump in and ask you another set of questions, but we do have some questions from the chat. Is it okay, team, if we take some of these questions as we close out?
Yeah, let's do it. I think that'd be ideal.
Okay, perfect. So here's a question we have from the chat. I think is a really good one. What happens to students who are ahead or behind in this model?
So it's the whole point of this is where every single student almost has their individualized scope and sequence, right? And so even though, again, you want to start from point A and end up at point B, if you're a lot further ahead, your scope and sequence will just be a more advanced one. So you've already finished all your 7th grade material, you can move on to 8th grade material. And so there are still going to be points where you have a gap in your learning from 7th grade and you're going to be coming back to work with other kids. There are going to be points when you want to review work, and so you're still going to be working in a whole group setting. There's still ways that you can increase and sort of push through your depth of knowledge, so you can be working on a project with other students even though you've technically already learned it. But you will be doing more work with the other more advanced students. But again, it's more individualized, so you can be working there side by side with other students, and you could be an advanced student working in a peer-to-peer modality with another learner, and you are actually teaching them. So there's a lot more sort of diversity in the classroom in that way.
Yeah, I love that. This next question, this is for both you or Joel. We have so many more questions in time, so we're going to answer as many as we can, but I think this is a great one. This is for you or Joel. Can you speak about the role of the teacher in an innovative learning model like Teach to One?
Joel, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. I'd love to take that one. The role of teachers to teach. Most importantly, live teacher-led instruction is the most impactful and most important learning modality, because learning is itself a social and emotional process. So we want the teachers to teach. We just want to make sure that we're setting teachers up for success. So the grouping that's happened each and every day helps to make sure, as Eddie was saying, that when his teacher is teaching a particular concept to a group of 15 students, that they've all mastered the predecessor knowledge to succeed with that, and thus the teacher can be more successful in that moment. But because we're doing all the regrouping each day and the analytics all behind the scenes, it gives the teachers more time to focus on student relationships, so focus more of their time on planning and really collaborating with their colleagues. So there's much more shared ownership over individual student success.
Brilliant. And we got a follow-up question here, Joel, quickly in the chat around teachers. What's the ratio of teacher to student that's needed to support this model?
It varies. We typically work in schools where the same teacher-student ratio. That doesn't change at all. Whatever it was before Teach to One, that extends afterwards. Some schools have more, some schools have less. The more adults there are, the greater we can personalize. But there are plenty of configurations that operate in schools where they haven't made any material changes to their staff.
Thank you, Joel. All right, last question before we close out here for either Joel or Eddie. Eddie, you might want to take this one.
Sure.
Is this model being used, the Teach for One model, is this being used for subjects other than math, used with younger students? What's your reach there?
Yeah, so it's currently only used for math. I think our goal as an organization is to really set the stage for innovative learning models to be sort of spread across the board. Teach to One specifically, the one that we've designed, is only for math right now in the middle grades. We do have other programs and ideas for the younger grades, but currently it is only for math.
Great, super helpful. Alrighty, friends who've been with us, we're going to go ahead and close out. I see a couple of questions here about the materials. I'm almost certain, Joel or Eddie, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm almost certain we will be sharing out, or we can share out the materials, both the videos that we used and the deck. Is that right?
I believe so. I think our friends at Kaltura they're managing the platform, will help us understand that, but my understanding is that is the case.
Okay, perfect. So if you put in questions, friends, about getting the information, that's where we'll share it. And yes, to those who asked if the leaps are on the Transcend website, they are on the Transcend website. It is transcendeducation.org. I would not be doing my job if I didn't get that in the last minute. All right, friends. So the question then that I think we're left with is like, what is it going to take to get far more washing machines here and now into classroom school communities across the country? What are the ultimate key ingredients? I think some headlines and some things that we've learned over the years is that these kinds of holistic innovations are truly the kinds of innovations we've been waiting for. For a long time, I know many of us who have been in this field for a long time, we have seen sort of the rotating spiral of silver bullets. There is this input, there's that input, there's this awesome thing that's going to change everything. And I think what we're starting to realize, to go back to the metaphor that Joel set up for us, is that many of those things might have been refrigerators. They might have been things that we plugged in on the side. We didn't really have to remodel anything. We didn't have to make a cupboard for it. We just kind of stuck it in the middle of the kitchen and said, here we go, we got a refrigerator. And I think now what innovative learning models, and particularly what the Teach to One model is really pushing us to do, is to really reconfigure and repipe in the way that we have to get a washing machine into our homes, to reconfigure and to repipe both the technical and the operational aspects of schooling, but also the mindsets and the orientations and the beliefs around learning that are at the center. So I personally have never felt more hopeful that we can be on a path to making these kinds of models so much more available, to making communities who want to do this kind of design, making it available for them as well. But I do think it will take persistent effort of innovative model providers like in classrooms to be pushing forward this work. And so I am super grateful as part of an organization that thinks about innovative learning models for these folks like Teach to One, who are just on the forefront of really trying to get tangible about what it means to move from the left of industrial classrooms to the right, 21st century classrooms that are fundamentally more equitable and learner-centered. That wraps us up, friends. If you have questions, you can reach Eddie here. And again, hopefully you'll get all the materials, but you can reach Eddie here and then you can reach me at Transcend. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much, colleagues, Joel and Eddie and Michelle, for just supporting this session and getting everything set up. It's been a joy to get to present with you all.